Evelyn Moore stepped into the grand ballroom of the historic Manhattan Hotel, alone on that crisp winter evening, her movements graceful despite the heavy atmosphere of judgment that immediately greeted her. The venue was a masterpiece of classic New York luxury, filled with towering marble pillars, cascading crystal chandeliers, and the muffled chatter of the city's most exclusive elite. As her simple but elegantly tailored black silk dress swept across the polished floor, the ambient noise of the room seemed to experience a sudden, chilling drop. A prominent woman, draped in an emerald green gown, leaned closely toward her companion, her eyes narrowing as she gestured subtly with her champagne flute toward the entrance. She asked, in a pierced whisper, who the solitary woman could possibly be, to which her partner replied with a mocking smirk, that he had absolutely no idea, though it was blatantly obvious she did not belong in their elevated social circle. Evelyn kept her gaze fixed ahead, refusing to let the cold reception diminish the quiet dignity that defined her every step. Near the center of the lavishly decorated hall, standing beside the main banquet table laden with ice sculptures and rare delicacies, Victoria King was the first to openly display her hostility. Clad in a brilliant crimson gown, completely encrusted with shimmering rhinestones, Victoria held her crystal glass aloft, her lips curling into an expression of pure disdain as she watched Evelyn approach. She crossed her arms tightly, tilting her head with a patronizing air, before turning toward her mother to ensure her voice carried across the immediate radius of wealthy onlookers. "Look at that, Mother," Victoria said loudly enough for at least a dozen nearby socialites to suspend their conversations and turn their heads in anticipation of a spectacle. "I have reviewed our exclusive guest list multiple times tonight, and I am absolutely certain that I do not recall seeing this woman's face or name anywhere on it." Victoria's mother, Beatrice King, the grand matriarch of the family empire, slowly adjusted the massive strand of South Sea pearls resting against her neck as she directed a frigid, calculating gaze toward Evelyn. She allowed a superficial, poison-laced smile to touch her lips as she stepped forward, her voice smooth like velvet, but carrying the sharp edge of a razor blade. "My dear, I am completely certain that your name does not appear anywhere on our highly restricted registry of distinguished guests tonight," Beatrice pronounced, her tone dripping with artificial sweetness that fooled no one in the vicinity. Evelyn did not hesitate or slow her pace for even a single second, continuing her steady walk past the whispering clusters of billionaires until she reached the velvet-draped registration desk. With an unbothered calmness that seemed to irritate the onlookers, she opened her modest cream clutch and extracted a thick, gold-embossed invitation card. "Good evening," Evelyn said in a warm, perfectly cordial tone, extending the card toward the staff. "Here is my official invitation to the gala." The security officer, a towering man dressed in a tailored midnight black suit, carefully took the cream-colored card, tilting it beneath the light of a crystal chandelier to examine the authentic texture. He ran his white-gloved thumb over the raised lettering and the intricate metallic seals, checking the security watermarks that guaranteed entry to Manhattan's most prestigious event of the winter season. "It appears to be completely legitimate, ma'am," the officer muttered after a long, tense moment of inspection, looking up at Beatrice with an apologetic expression that betrayed his discomfort. "It only appears to be legitimate," Beatrice repeated, letting out a short, sharp laugh that cut through the room like a blade, her expression hardening into absolute contempt. "It is truly pathetic that our highly trained security staff is completely incapable of confirming a forgery with absolute certainty when an outsider tries to breach our gates. This magnificent evening is meant to be an incredibly exclusive gathering for the pillars of society, not a chaotic public market open to just anyone who walks off the street." Within seconds, the suppressed amusement of the surrounding guests transformed into an uncomfortable, buzzing murmur that rippled across the entire length of the grand ballroom. The whispers grew in volume, like a rising swarm of hornets, with several wealthy individuals shamelessly pulling out their custom smartphones to discreetly record the brewing confrontation. Thomas King, the youngest son of the family empire, raised his sleek phone without a shred of decency or hesitation, immediately opening his social media application to begin a live broadcast. "This is going to be absolutely legendary entertainment," Thomas whispered into his microphone with a cynical, toothy grin as he focused the high-definition camera directly on Evelyn's face. Evelyn maintained an impeccable sense of inner calm, standing tall against the mounting tide of mockery, as this was certainly not the first time people had looked at her as if she did not fit into their narrow definition of wealth. She took a deep, steadying breath, keeping her shoulders perfectly squared and her dignity entirely intact, while the heavy wave of arrogance pressed against her from every corner. Suddenly, a young banquet waiter, carrying a large silver tray, stacked high with crystal glasses of expensive red wine, tried to navigate his way through the dense crowd near the registration area. His steps were normally firm and practiced, fully accustomed to the rigorous demands of high-level luxury service, but someone in the crowd deliberately extended an elbow, shoving him from behind just as he passed Evelyn. The sudden impact caused the tray to tilt violently, sending a massive glass of dark crimson liquid flying through the air before it shattered against the floor. The rich, staining wine poured directly over the front of Evelyn's beautiful black dress, soaking through the fabric and leaving an immediate, unmistakable mark. A suffocating silence gripped the immediate area for a heartbeat, followed instantly by an explosion of poorly concealed giggles and mocking gasps from the onlookers. "Oh, what an absolutely dreadful display of clumsiness," Victoria exclaimed, covering her mouth with a hand in a theatrical show of surprise, though her eyes danced with malicious amusement. "Although, I suppose a woman of your background is entirely used to dealing with these types of messy public accidents." Evelyn lowered her eyes for a brief moment, looking down at the damp, dark stain that was rapidly spreading across the delicate fabric of her evening dress. She could feel the cold moisture clinging to her skin, but the burning weight of the cruel stares and the echoing laughter around her was infinitely more uncomfortable than the wine. Before she could even begin to address the damage, Victoria stepped forward with an exaggerated flourish, holding a white linen napkin she had snatched from a nearby cocktail table. "Let me be of assistance to you," Victoria said in a voice that mocked the very concept of charity, leaning in close as if she intended to blot the stain away. Instead of treating the fabric with care, Victoria pressed the napkin down with immense force, twisting it aggressively to smear the dark wine across a much larger area, permanently ruining the dress. "Oh my goodness, what an absolute shame," Victoria added with heavy sarcasm as she stepped back. "It appears that I am completely useless when it comes to performing menial cleaning duties." The cruel laughter erupted once more, louder and more uninhibited this time, as Thomas repositioned his phone to capture the ruined garment from multiple angles. "This footage is absolute digital gold," Thomas muttered to his rapidly growing online audience, his face illuminated by the glow of the screen as comments flooded the chat. Evelyn pressed her lips together tightly, fully aware that she had been deliberately provoked and that absolutely nothing about this sequence of events was an accident. Yet, she forced herself to maintain an ironclad composure, straightening her spine and holding Victoria's venomous gaze without a single blink of submission. The security officer stepped forward awkwardly, clearly sweating beneath his collar due to the extreme tension suffocating the air. "Ma'am, perhaps it would be best for everyone involved if you stepped out into the main corridor while we sort out this misunderstanding," the guard suggested in a hushed tone. Evelyn looked him dead in the eye and replied with a voice so calm and cutting that it paralyzed him, stating that she had just as much right to be there as anyone else. The dark wine had begun to dry slightly against the expensive fabric, leaving a rigid, shadowy trail that seemed to loudly broadcast the public humiliation the King family was trying to enforce. Evelyn remained standing perfectly still, in the dead center of the magnificent ballroom, completely surrounded by snickering millionaires, judgmental glares, and a continuous hum of gossip. The heavy atmosphere, thick with the scent of imported French perfumes and suffocating arrogance, seemed to grow more oppressive with every passing second that ticked by on the grandfather clock. The nervous security officer shifted his weight, making a subtle gesture with his hand as he tried one more time to de-escalate the situation before it ruined the family's reputation. "Ma'am, I must insist that the absolute best course of action would be for me to escort you outside immediately while we quietly resolve this credential issue." Evelyn turned her face slowly toward him, her eyes flashing with an unyielding fire that made the large man take an involuntary half-step backward. "I have absolutely no intention of leaving this room," she stated, her words carrying an unmistakable authority. "I was formally invited. I possess a valid invitation, and I will not allow myself to be treated like an unwanted criminal." The powerful words vibrated through the temporary silence of the immediate crowd, causing several of the wealthier guests to shift uncomfortably in their expensive leather chairs. A few of them looked at her with a newfound sense of surprise, startled by the sheer confidence radiating from a woman they had deemed powerless, while others simply shook their heads. Victoria intervened immediately, refusing to allow Evelyn even a shred of dignity or a chance to defend her place at the gathering. "Oh, please. It is completely obvious that you simply went to a cheap print shop down the street and manufactured a pathetic counterfeit copy," Victoria sneered. "In this modern day and age, absolutely anyone with a basic computer can replicate a high-end invitation to sneak into places where they do not belong." The security guard lifted the cream card once again, his fingers trembling slightly as he felt the intense pressure of the King family matriarch watching his every move. "Mrs. King, I have thoroughly verified that the gold foil embossment and the unique serial stamps match our records perfectly, so it truly does appear authentic." "It only appears authentic to an untrained eye," Victoria shot back, her theatrical voice dripping with condescension as she looked around the room for approval from her peers. "So tell me, are we going to allow a complete stranger to dictate the rules of our own private gala based on a questionable piece of paper?" "No, I think not." Evelyn took a deep, grounding breath, refusing to match Victoria's shrill hysteria, and calmly adjusted her stance on the polished marble floor. "My invitation is completely authentic, and I have absolutely no requirement to prove anything further to people who lack basic manners," she said softly. Beatrice King lifted her chin, her diamonds catching the light as she raised her voice so that the entire room could hear her final judgment. "A woman who enters a high society gala completely alone, wearing a ruined dress, devoid of a single piece of fine jewelry, expects us to believe she belongs here? My dear, in our world, it takes a modern fortune and an established bloodline to belong, not just a stolen piece of paper." The whispering reached a fever pitch, and the security guard, feeling the immense weight of Beatrice's freezing stare, finally reached out to gently take Evelyn by the arm to force her toward the exit. Evelyn pulled her arm away with a lightning-fast motion, stepping back with such a fierce command of her personal space that the officer froze mid-motion. "Do not dare to lay a single hand on me," she commanded in a tone so sharp and resolute that it felt like a physical barrier between them. "I have committed absolutely no wrongdoing tonight, and I will not walk out of this establishment as if I am an intruder who committed a crime." This display of absolute fearlessness stunned the surrounding audience, plunging the immediate radius into a breathless, heavy silence. Thomas seized the dramatic pause to push his smartphone camera even closer to Evelyn's face, eager to broadcast any sign of tears or weakness to his viewers. "Did you all just hear that ridiculous statement?" Thomas whispered gleefully into his screen, watching the live viewer count skyrocket past 40,000 people. Victoria took another step forward, her movements calculated like a predator stalking its prey on a runway, her lips twisted into a venomous smile. "Tell me something," she said, leaning in so close that Evelyn could smell the expensive champagne on her breath. "Where exactly did you manage to purchase that tragic excuse for a dress? Did you find it on a clearance rack at some discount department store in the outer boroughs? Do not tell me you actually believed you could blend into a crowd of true Manhattan royalty while wearing such incredibly cheap fabric." A fresh wave of laughter broke out among a specific cluster of loyal family friends, though a few older gentlemen looked away, clearly feeling a twinge of shame. Evelyn lifted her head with absolute serenity, her expression unreadable as she looked directly at her tormentor. "My dress does not define the core of who I am as a human being, and your cruel comments certainly do not define my worth either," she responded. The cutting remark failed to elicit any laughter from the wider crowd this time, and the mocking murmurs began to die down into a quiet stillness. It was as if Evelyn's words had struck a chord of truth in the hearts of a few guests who still possessed a shred of conscience. Victoria, sensing that she was starting to lose absolute control over the narrative of the evening, grew visibly irritated and refused to back down. "How incredibly bold of you to speak to us in that manner," Victoria hissed, her hands clenching into tight fists against her red gown. "I am completely certain that you only sneaked into this event with the pathetic hope of catching the attention of a wealthy older husband to rescue you from your ordinary life." An elderly, well-respected businessman sitting near the center of the room cleared his throat loudly, breaking the family's monopoly on the conversation. "Perhaps we ought to actually listen to what the lady has to say," Mr. Donald Brooks suggested in a calm, authoritative voice. "She does not possess the demeanor of an impostor." Beatrice slowly turned her head toward the elderly gentleman, her eyes narrowing into slits as she leveled a glare that could freeze water. "Mr. Brooks, we appreciate your long-standing business relationship with our firm, but this is strictly a private matter for our family to resolve," she warned. "We, and we alone, will determine who belongs in our social circles and who is rejected." Mr. Brooks lowered his eyes, turning his attention back to his drink in a tense silence, fully aware that he had been publicly rebuked for showing an ounce of compassion. Evelyn spoke once more, her voice ringing clearly across the ballroom, without a single tremor of fear. "You have absolutely no legal or moral right to treat another human being with such systematic cruelty. I received a formal invitation. I arrived because I was expected, and I will not move a single inch from this spot just because your family has an overinflated sense of superiority." Victoria let out an exaggerated theatrical laugh that echoed off the high ceilings, turning back to the crowd as if she had just heard the most amusing joke of the century. "Did you all hear that ridiculous statement? She actually believes she can dictate terms to us in our own house." Thomas, standing directly behind his illuminated screen, could not stop his hands from shaking with pure excitement as the digital audience grew. The live stream had easily surpassed 50,000 concurrent viewers, with people from all across the country typing messages at an unreadable speed. Evelyn felt a distinct rhythmic vibration emanating from inside the cream clutch she held tightly against her waist. She chose not to open the bag just yet, but the sudden knowledge that her husband Adrian was nearby infused her entire being with an indestructible surge of strength. The security guard remained paralyzed in his position, caught between his duty to the wealthy hosts and his basic human respect for the woman standing before him. The King family continued to glare at her as if she were nothing more than an uninvited street performer meant to provide them with temporary amusement. Beatrice took a slow step forward, her fingers idly tracing the contours of her pearl necklace as she prepared to deliver her final ultimatum. "This entire gala is funded by our family foundation, and we have absolutely no requirement to tolerate individuals who disrupt the elegance of our evening," she stated coldly. "I highly recommend that you accept the guard's escort through the service exit right now before this situation becomes infinitely more embarrassing for you." Evelyn took a deep, profound breath, completely detached from the ruined state of her silk dress. What kept her spine perfectly straight was the absolute conviction that she would never give these arrogant people the satisfaction of seeing her broken or reduced to tears. The thick tension in the room was almost physical, and every single guest was completely captivated by the unfolding drama. Evelyn tilted her chin upward, her eyes locking onto Beatrice with absolute clarity. "I will absolutely not use the service exit," she announced. "I am not an employee of this establishment. I am an invited guest, and I will remain exactly where I stand." The bold declaration hung suspended in the air like a heavy curtain, solid and unyielding against the opulent backdrop of the Manhattan ballroom. The rising murmurs were suddenly cut short, as the imposing figure of Ronald King, the great patriarch of the empire, materialized from the shadows at the back of the hall. His serious, deeply lined face was framed by perfectly groomed silver hair, and his custom-tailored black tuxedo gave him the appearance of a man who ruled with an iron fist. His mere presence was enough to cause multiple high-level business conversations to cease instantly, as everyone in the room was accustomed to obeying his absolute authority. Upon spotting her husband, Beatrice's tense expression instantly melted into a smile of immense relief. "Oh, my dear, you have arrived at the absolute perfect moment to handle this disaster," she called out loudly. Ronald walked forward with measured, heavy steps, looking down at Evelyn's stained dress with an unmistakable expression of profound disgust. "What on earth is going on here?" he demanded. Victoria immediately took the floor, speaking rapidly as if she had spent her entire life rehearsing for this exact moment of family drama. "This ordinary woman managed to slip past the front gates and crash our private celebration," Victoria explained, gesturing wildly toward Evelyn. "She claims to possess a valid invitation, but I am entirely convinced that it is nothing more than a cheap, dangerous forgery meant to embarrass us." Evelyn remained perfectly calm, refusing to flinch under the patriarch's intense scrutiny. "I have already presented my card to your staff, and it has been verified as authentic," she stated. The security guard nervously lifted the cream-colored envelope, extending it toward Ronald with a trembling hand. "Sir, I have checked the metallic stamps and the security watermark, and everything aligns perfectly with our official guest registry." Ronald snatched the card, staring down at the gold foil with a cold, analytical gaze that sought to find a lie. Appearances can be incredibly deceiving in this city, and these types of high-end papers are laughably easy for a criminal to replicate with the right equipment, Ronald declared, his deep voice carrying a finality that brooked no argument. Evelyn interrupted his train of thought with a serene, unbothered tone that caused several nearby executives to gasp at her audacity. "My invitation is completely real, and I have absolutely no intention of wasting my energy trying to convince a room full of arrogant strangers of that fact," she said. Beatrice lifted her chin even higher, looking around at the surrounding guests as if she were gathering an army of support against an enemy. "Do you see the utter lack of respect this outsider possesses? She does not even know how to address a man of my husband's stature with the proper level of deference." An uncomfortable, heavy stillness fell over the magnificent ballroom, broken only by the soft clinking of ice melting in unattended cocktail glasses. Then, a middle-aged corporate executive sitting near the champagne fountain decided to find his courage, speaking up in a measured, neutral tone. "With all due respect, Mrs. King, it truly does not seem appropriate to publicly humiliate a lady in this manner," Mr. Frank Foster said carefully. "She surrendered her invitation to your staff, and I see absolutely no logical reason to treat her like a common criminal suspect." The unexpected defense startled a few guests, but Beatrice reacted instantly with a smile that carried a terrifying warning. "Thank you so much for your unsolicited opinion, Mr. Foster," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "However, this is an exclusive gathering, organized entirely by our family, and we will decide who deserves to stand on this floor." Mr. Foster adjusted his tie nervously, sinking back into his chair without another word, completely silenced by the matriarch's unspoken threat. Victoria seized the opportunity to inject even more malice into the conversation, stepping closer to Evelyn with a mocking tilt of her head. "Is it possible that you were simply desperate for a bit of high society attention tonight?" she asked, her laughter bubbling up. Arriving at a luxury gala completely alone, wearing such a remarkably basic dress, must be part of some pathetic strategy to climb the social ladder. "Are you here to hunt for a wealthy man to pay your debts?" A few cruel chuckles surfaced from the loyal sycophants in the crowd, though many others looked away, increasingly uncomfortable with the blatant cruelty being displayed. Evelyn, without losing a single ounce of her poise, looked directly at Victoria and answered, "I am present tonight solely because I was formally requested to be here, and I will not tolerate your family inventing malicious lies to justify your complete lack of human decency." The murmurs grew louder once more, but the tone of the room was beginning to shift away from pure mockery toward a tense curiosity. A few individuals began whispering urgently among themselves, deeply impressed by the unwavering firmness Evelyn displayed in the face of such immense social pressure. Ronald King lifted a single hand, immediately imposing absolute silence across the entire ballroom, with a single gesture of his fingers. "Look here, lady," he said, his deep voice vibrating with an aggressive authority. "The rules of this establishment are incredibly simple. Absolutely no one enters this room unless they belong to our elite social circle, and it is blindingly obvious to everyone here that you do not belong." Evelyn held his intense gaze without a single hint of hesitation or fear. "The fact that I do not belong to your shallow social circle does not mean I lack the right to be in this room," she countered. Victoria let out another sharp, ironic laugh, turning to face the surrounding tables with her arms wide open. "Did you all just hear that incredible amount of delusion?" she sneered. "Now it seems that absolutely anyone can march into a multi-million-dollar event simply because they have the confidence to believe they belong here." Thomas continued to broadcast every single second of the confrontation, focusing his camera on Evelyn's stained dress before panning to his father's furious expression. The live viewer count had shattered all expectations, climbing past 60,000 people in real time as social media users shared the link globally. Thomas smiled with absolute satisfaction, whispering into his phone that this night was turning out to be infinitely better than he could have ever imagined. Evelyn gripped her cream clutch firmly, refusing to yield a single inch of ground as the pressure reached its absolute peak. A pair of younger executives exchanged deeply worried glances near the main entrance, watching the situation escalate into a public relations nightmare. "This entire thing is spinning completely out of control," one of them whispered under his breath, noticing how many people were recording. Beatrice, however, was far too blinded by her own arrogance to notice the shifting digital tide. "My dear," she said, her voice dropping into a tone that was simultaneously sweet and deadly, "why don't you do every single person in this room a massive favor and quietly exit through the back kitchen doors? That way, we can all avoid any further unpleasantness." Evelyn did not offer an immediate response. Instead, she slowly looked around the massive hall, observing the expectant faces of over 200 wealthy citizens who seemed to view her suffering as entertainment. She knew they were desperately waiting for her to break, but she would never grant them that victory. "I will absolutely not use the service entrance," she stated clearly. The firm refusal transformed the room into a powder keg of anticipation, like the heavy air before a massive summer thunderstorm over Manhattan. Ronald crossed his arms over his chest, his face darkening with intense irritation as his authority was publicly defied. "In that case, you had better prepare yourself to face the severe legal consequences of your actions," he threatened. Evelyn felt another long vibration ripple through her cream clutch, signaling another incoming message from Adrian. She chose to ignore it for the moment, secure in the absolute knowledge that he was inside the building and walking toward her. Thomas, thoroughly amused by the drama, refocused his camera on his sister Victoria, who was smiling with absolute malice at Evelyn's impending removal. "This is only the opening act of your ruin," Victoria whispered loudly enough for several nearby guests to hear. Evelyn heard the threat clearly, but her exterior remained entirely unbothered, her eyes reflecting an internal peace they could not touch. The grand ballroom of the historic Manhattan Hotel felt like a theater of cruelty, where the sparkling crystal chandeliers illuminated a room devoid of basic human warmth. Beatrice, her face tight with anger, decided to push the humiliation to its absolute limit, her fingers tightening around her South Sea pearls until her knuckles turned white. "Listen to me very carefully, you insignificant girl," she hissed, discarding any pretense of upper-class politeness. "This magnificent venue is reserved for the true masters of this city, and you have caused more than enough of a disturbance tonight. Use the back door immediately." Victoria nodded along like a faithful shadow, her lips curled into a smug expression as she enjoyed the public execution of a stranger's dignity. "Yes, it would be much faster for you to vanish into the night," Victoria added with heavy sarcasm. "That way, your pathetic presence won't continue to ruin the refined atmosphere of our family's celebration." A few of the more spineless guests offered quiet chuckles to please their hosts, but a growing majority remained silent, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the cruelty became too blatant to ignore. The immense influence and financial power of the King family weighed heavily on everyone in the room, preventing anyone from standing up for justice. Evelyn, with the dark wine stain still clearly visible against her black silk dress, took a slow, deep breath to center her mind. "I have already made my position entirely clear to your family, and I will not repeat myself," she said, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "I am not a member of the hotel staff. I am an invited guest, and I will remain here until the conclusion of the evening." The security guard looked at Beatrice, silently begging for a clear directive on how to handle a woman who refused to fear them. Beatrice gave a sharp, definitive nod of her head. The large officer took a heavy step forward, his hands extended to forcefully grab Evelyn by the shoulders and drag her away from the registration desk. "I am truly sorry about this, ma'am, but you leave me with absolutely no choice," he muttered in a low voice that betrayed his internal shame. Evelyn stood her ground, her eyes locking onto his with such intense authority that his hands hovered in the air, unable to make physical contact. "Do not touch me," she repeated, her voice carrying a calm power that completely neutralized his physical advantage. The guard hesitated once more, his training conflicted by her absolute lack of fear, causing Beatrice to lose her temper entirely. "Do I truly need to repeat an incredibly simple instruction to a grown man?" she screamed at the guard. "Remove this trespasser from my sight this instant." Evelyn gripped her cream clutch with immense strength, feeling her heart rate elevate slightly as the physical threat drew closer. However, before the guard could make another move, her smartphone vibrated with a long, distinct pattern inside her purse, signaling that Adrian had crossed the threshold of the ballroom. That single piece of information restored her absolute composure, washing away any lingering trace of anxiety. Victoria used the moment to step into Evelyn's personal space, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper meant to break her spirit. "Do you want to know what the absolute most pathetic part of this entire situation is?" she asked. "The fact that you actually possess the delusion that you could ever fit into a room of this caliber." Evelyn looked down at the younger woman with a gaze full of profound pity. "I have absolutely no requirement to meet your superficial standards to know that I deserve basic human respect," she replied. Victoria scoffed, spinning around on her expensive heels, as if the profound statement were completely beneath her notice. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to stream the entire event to the digital world, his face lit up by the massive numbers flashing across his screen. "My friends, we are currently witnessing an absolute historical moment in high society drama," Thomas whispered to his viewers with a maniacal grin. "It is not every single day that an ordinary nobody tries to challenge the absolute power of my family at our own private gala." The live comment section was moving at a speed that was completely impossible to read, with tens of thousands of people arguing fiercely. Some viewers were desperately pleading for someone to help Evelyn, while others were mocking her appearance. But the entire digital landscape was completely captivated. A young corporate lawyer sitting near the stage leaned over to his wife and whispered that the King family was making a monumental mistake. The heavy doors of the grand ballroom suddenly flew open with a resounding, thunderous echo that caused every single head in the room to snap toward the entrance. The soft jazz music playing from the speakers seemed to fade into insignificance as the imposing silhouette of Adrian Moore stepped into the frame. He was a man whose reputation preceded him in every financial capital on earth, dressed in a flawless, custom-tailored dark charcoal suit that screamed absolute wealth and power. His crisp white shirt was paired with a deep blue silk tie that perfectly complemented his piercing gray eyes, and his luxury Swiss watch caught the light as he adjusted his cuffs. His entire demeanor radiated an unyielding, absolute authority that immediately altered the molecular structure of the room, silencing the murmurs instantly. An anxious young hotel manager rushed toward him, his face completely pale, as he tried to brief the billionaire on the unfolding disaster. "Mr. Moore, I am incredibly relieved you have arrived, but I must inform you that there has been a severe incident involving your wife," the manager stammered, his voice trembling. Adrian stopped dead in his tracks, his gray eyes narrowing into dangerous slits as he focused on the man's face. "Explain yourself immediately," Adrian commanded, his deep voice carrying an icy edge that made the manager sweat. "A few of the prominent guests have challenged her presence at the registry desk, and a waiter was shoved, causing an entire glass of red wine to ruin her dress," the manager explained quickly. "Since then, the King family has been publicly humiliating her in front of the entire assembly." A dense, suffocating silence followed the explanation, and Adrian's jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his face turned rigid. He took a single, deep breath to master the furious rage burning within his chest, before giving a sharp nod. "Thank you for the information," Adrian said coldly, his steps quickening as he marched directly into the heart of the grand ballroom, with an undeniable purpose. Inside the hall, the quiet sneers and superior smiles of the King family were still frozen on their faces, completely unaware of the storm that had just entered the room. Evelyn remained standing perfectly straight in the center of the floor, a solitary figure of absolute dignity, surrounded by a sea of wolves. Suddenly, the crowd parted like the Red Sea, as Adrian strode through the tables, his eyes locked entirely on his wife, and the massive dark stain on her dress. He wrapped his powerful arm around her waist, pulling her close against his side, in a protective gesture that sent a shockwave of realization through the onlookers. "What on earth has occurred in this room?" Adrian demanded, his voice projecting across the entire space like a thunderclap. Absolutely no one found the courage to respond immediately, and the arrogant smiles on the faces of the King family began to falter. Beatrice attempted to salvage her composure, smoothing her gown as she offered a tight, nervous laugh to the most powerful man in the room. "Adrian, what an absolutely wonderful surprise to see you here tonight," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Your companion seems to have experienced a minor misunderstanding with our security personnel regarding her credentials." "A minor misunderstanding?" Adrian repeated, his eyebrows arching in a display of absolute fury that made the nearby guests step backward. Victoria intervened quickly, her voice losing its previous volume as she tried to justify their behavior. She arrived completely alone, and her name was not immediately visible on our primary list, so we were simply exercising caution to protect the exclusivity of the event. Adrian's lips formed a thin, dangerous line as he stared down the younger woman. "And because you were exercising caution, you allowed your staff to pour red wine over her dress, and proceeded to insult her character in front of 200 people?" he asked, his voice dripping with an icy venom that caused Victoria to turn completely pale. Ronald King stepped forward, trying to utilize the deep, authoritative voice he normally used to intimidate his corporate rivals during board meetings. "Let us not exaggerate the situation, Mr. Moore. Ronald said, though his hands were trembling slightly behind his back. It was nothing more than an unfortunate, accidental incident that we can easily settle behind closed doors. Do not dare speak to me about accidental incidents, Adrian shot back, his voice rising in volume. My wife was systematically humiliated in public, and your entire family actively encouraged the abuse. Thomas King stood entirely frozen in the corner of the room, his smartphone still raised but his hands shaking so violently that the footage became a blurry mess. His live broadcast had completely shattered all platform records, exploding past 80,000 concurrent viewers as the news of Adrian Moore's arrival spread across the internet. The previous smug smile had vanished from Thomas's face, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Evelyn lifted her head, looking at her husband with a profound sense of pride and relief, her dignity fully restored by his powerful presence. A wealthy investor near the stage whispered to his wife that the King family had just committed absolute suicide by targeting the wrong individual. Adrian turned his fierce gaze toward the terrified security guard who had attempted to remove his wife. "Did you actively participate in this disgusting display?" he demanded. The large man swallowed hard, lowering his eyes to the floor as he took a step back from the billionaire. "Sir, I was only following the explicit orders of my employers," the guard whispered, his voice cracking under the intense pressure. "You were following entirely erroneous orders," Adrian declared, his voice cutting through the guard's excuse like a chainsaw. Beatrice attempted to step in once more, her voice trembling as she tried to minimize the damage to her family's empire. "Adrian, please, let us not create an unnecessary scene in front of our distinguished colleagues. I am completely certain we can resolve this minor grievance in a private setting." "No, we absolutely will not," Adrian roared, his voice echoing off the walls. "You chose to publicly humiliate my wife in this exact room, and it is in this exact room where the entire world will witness the consequences." The absolute silence that followed his statement was so heavy that it felt as though the entire ballroom had run out of oxygen. Evelyn stood firmly by his side, her hand resting against his arm as she watched the complete collapse of the family that had tried to destroy her. Adrian looked directly at Ronald King, his eyes reflecting an unyielding determination that signaled the absolute end of their business relationship. "To ensure that there is absolutely no lingering doubt in anyone's mind, this incredible woman standing beside me is my legal wife, Evelyn Moore," he announced to the crowd. A collective gasp rippled through the entire audience like electricity, and multiple crystal glasses slipped from the numb fingers of wealthy socialites, shattering on the floor. Victoria's face was completely devoid of color, her mouth opening and closing like a fish as she tried to process the information. "Your wife? That is completely impossible," Victoria stammered, her voice high and panicked. "How could a man of your immense stature be married to someone who arrives at a high society event looking like an ordinary—" "Silence!" Adrian interrupted with a terrifying shout that caused Victoria to jump backward in fear. The silence returned, deeper and more terrifying than before, as the true balance of power in the room became undeniable. Ronald King tried to step forward to offer an apology, his voice entirely stripped of its previous corporate authority. "Adrian, I am completely certain that this entire situation is nothing more than a tragic, terrible misunderstanding. Absolutely no one in our family had any intention of causing offense to you or your wife. It was a simple case of mistaken identity." "A tragic misunderstanding?" Adrian asked, his laughter carrying a dark, dangerous edge that terrified everyone in the room. "Is it a simple misunderstanding when your daughter deliberately smears red wine across my wife's clothing? Is it a misunderstanding when your wife tries to throw her out through the service exit like common trash?" Ronald could not find a single word to respond, his eyes darting frantically around the room for support, but every single one of his business partners looked away. Adrian scanned the faces of the entire assembly, his gaze lingering on the people who had laughed loudest. I want someone to stand up right now and repeat the disgusting insults they threw at my wife," Adrian challenged. "Let us see who among you possesses the courage to say those words to my face." The silence that filled the grand ballroom was absolute and suffocating, as not a single human being in the room possessed the courage to look Adrian Moore in the eye. The wealthy elite of Manhattan, who had been snickering and recording Evelyn's suffering only minutes before, now kept their eyes glued to the floor in absolute shame. Adrian let out a cold, mocking chuckle that cut through their cowardice like a whip. "Exactly as I thought," he said, his voice dripping with profound contempt. "You are incredibly brave when it comes to abusing a solitary woman, but you become completely mute the moment a real man stands up to face you." Evelyn looked at her husband, her heart swelling with an immense sense of gratitude for the unwavering protection he provided. Adrian focused his attention back on Ronald King, who looked as though he had aged 20 years in the span of a few minutes. "Tonight, your family was planning to proudly announce a historic, multi-million-dollar merger with Horizon Industries, correct?" Adrian asked, his voice perfectly calm but carrying the weight of a death sentence. Beatrice's face twisted into an expression of pure panic, her hands shaking so violently that her pearl necklace clicked loudly. "Well, let me make this entirely clear to every single investor in this room," Adrian continued. "That entire merger is hereby completely and permanently cancelled, effective this very second." The announcement dropped like an atomic bomb, causing an immediate uproar of shock and disbelief to echo through the tables. "What did you just say?" Ronald whispered, his voice completely hollow, as his life's work vanished into thin air. "You heard me perfectly," Adrian repeated, his voice solid as rock. "There will be absolutely no merger, no partnership, no public announcement, and absolutely no future business between our entities." Victoria completely lost her mind, stepping forward and screaming at the top of her lungs. "This is an absolute outrage. You cannot possibly destroy a multi-billion-dollar corporate alliance simply because of an ordinary woman's dress." Adrian silenced her with a single, icy glare that made her voice die in her throat. "Hold your tongue," Adrian commanded, and for the first time in her pampered life, Victoria immediately obeyed out of pure terror. Thomas stood paralyzed as his phone screen displayed a staggering live viewer count of over 150,000 people watching his family's ultimate destruction. Adrian turned his gaze toward the patriarch, his face set in stone as he prepared to deliver the final crushing blow to their empire. "You need to learn an incredibly valuable lesson tonight, King," Adrian said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "True power is never measured by the price of your diamonds, the labels on your clothing, or your ability to look down on others. True power resides entirely in your capacity to show basic human respect to every single soul you encounter. And your family has proven tonight that you are entirely bankrupt in that regard." The words resonated through the ballroom like a final judgment, leaving the King family entirely ruined in front of their entire social circle. The corporate reporter who had been quietly taking notes in the corner of the room was typing at a furious speed, knowing he had just witnessed the business story of the decade. Beatrice, completely broken by the realization that her family was financially ruined, did something that absolutely no one in Manhattan society ever expected to see. She dropped to her knees on the polished marble floor, her expensive gown wrinkling beneath her, as she looked up at Adrian, with tears streaming down her face. "Please, Adrian, I beg of you to reconsider this catastrophic decision," she pleaded, her voice cracking with emotion. "Think about our family's legacy, our charitable foundation, and the thousands of employees who depend entirely on our success." Adrian looked down at the kneeling matriarch with a face entirely devoid of sympathy or warmth, his gray eyes colder than the winter air outside. "Now you finally comprehend what it truly feels like to be publicly humiliated and brought to your knees in front of your peers," he said softly. "That exact feeling of helplessness is precisely what you and your children forced my wife to endure tonight for your own sick amusement." Beatrice lowered her head, her tears dripping onto the marble floor as her pride was completely eradicated. Victoria tried to pull her mother up, her voice desperate as she looked at Adrian. "This is an absolute abuse of power, Adrian. It was nothing more than an unfortunate mistake, and you are transforming it into a complete financial apocalypse." Evelyn stepped forward, her voice ringing out with an absolute clarity and calmness that immediately commanded the attention of the room. "An unfortunate mistake?" she asked Victoria directly. "You called me a common intruder, you mocked my clothing, and you deliberately ruined my dress under the pretense of helping me. That was not an accident. It was a systematic, malicious plan to destroy my dignity for your own entertainment." Victoria opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out, as the absolute truth of Evelyn's statement was undeniable. Thomas finally lowered his smartphone, his face burning with a deep, permanent shame, as he realized he had personally broadcasted his family's execution to the entire world. Ronald King made one final, desperate attempt to salvage the remains of his empire, his voice pleading as he looked at the billionaire. "Adrian, please, let us put an end to this public madness. If you are unsatisfied with the current terms of the merger, we are completely open to renegotiating the profit splits to your absolute advantage." Adrian let out a dry, humorless laugh that sent chills down Ronald's spine. "Renegotiate? You still fail to comprehend the absolute core of the issue, Ronald. This situation has absolutely nothing to do with profit margins or corporate percentages. This is entirely about human respect, and you have absolutely nothing left to offer me." Adrian took a slow step forward, looking around the room at the stunned faces of the Manhattan elite, before returning his gaze to the patriarch. "But do not deceive yourselves into thinking that canceling this merger is the conclusion of your punishment," Adrian added, his voice dropping into a dangerous whisper. "There is one final piece of information that you desperately need to understand tonight." The tension in the ballroom tightened to an impossible degree, as everyone held their breath. Morgan Capital Partners has quietly acquired 35% of the total voting shares of Crown Global Group over the last 6 months, Adrian revealed. The announcement caused Ronald's eyes to nearly pop out of his head as his knees buckled. "What did you just say?" Ronald gasped, clutching his chest as his entire world dissolved into nothingness. "I am currently the absolute largest individual shareholder of your family's company," Adrian announced with a proud smile. "And I will be utilizing that power to call an extraordinary emergency meeting of the board of directors at 9 o'clock on Monday morning to permanently remove your family from the leadership of the empire you built." Evelyn looked at the ruined faces of their tormentors and spoke one last time. "You attempted to destroy me tonight because you judged my simple appearance as a sign of weakness," she said. "Today, you have learned that dignity is an indestructible shield, and we are standing far above you." Adrian wrapped his arm around Evelyn, and together they turned their backs on the King family, walking out into the New York night as a thunderous silence filled the room. The digital landscape of the entire world exploded with unprecedented fury the following morning, as the video footage recorded by Thomas and the other guests went completely viral across every major social media platform. By 6 o'clock in the morning, the phrase "respect is power" was trending as the #1 topic across the United States, with millions of citizens expressing their absolute outrage at the King family's behavior. The major news networks in New York City picked up the story immediately, broadcasting the footage of Evelyn's dignified resistance alongside financial commentary detailing the catastrophic collapse of Crown Global Group's stock value. The public backlash was immediate and total, with thousands of consumers launching an absolute boycott of every single product and brand associated with the King family empire. On Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, the emergency meeting of the board of directors concluded with an absolute and unanimous vote to strip Ronald King of all executive authority, relegating him to a meaningless honorary position with zero decision-making power. Beatrice was permanently removed from the chair of the family's charitable foundation, her name erased from the building, while Victoria was terminated from her position in public relations without a single dollar of severance. Thomas, completely humiliated by his own actions, deleted all of his social media accounts and vanished from the public eye, unable to walk down a single street in Manhattan without being mocked by passers-by. The King family, who had ruled New York high society with an iron fist for decades, was completely reduced to a historical footnote of arrogance and ruin. 2 years later, the grand ballroom of the historic Manhattan Hotel was filled once again for a magnificent global gala. But this time, the event was organized by the United Nations to honor leaders who demonstrated exceptional ethical leadership. Evelyn Moore walked into the room wearing a breathtaking, simple navy gown that flowed elegantly behind her, her hand resting securely in Adrian's arm, as the entire assembly of global dignitaries stood up to deliver a thunderous ovation. She walked up to the grand podium, looking out at the hundreds of smiling faces before she began to speak, her voice carrying the deep wisdom of a woman who had conquered the darkest storm. As we journey through this long and unpredictable life, we eventually come to realize that the grandest illusion of human existence is the belief that wealth, titles, and material possessions can somehow elevate one soul above another. True nobility is never found in the external trappings of luxury or the shallow applause of an elite circle, but rather in the quiet, unyielding dignity with which we carry ourselves and the profound respect we extend to every single human being we meet. The true measure of a person's character is revealed not when they are surrounded by those who praise them, but in how they choose to treat the individuals they perceive as having absolutely nothing to offer them in return. Cruelty and arrogance are nothing more than the loud, desperate masks worn by internal insecurity, whereas kindness and humility are the silent, indestructible hallmarks of a truly powerful and fully realized human soul. When we look back on our lives from the sunset years of experience, the diamonds we wore and the bank accounts we accumulated will fade into absolute insignificance, leaving behind only the legacy of how we made other people feel. We must understand that every single person we encounter is fighting a hidden battle we know absolutely nothing about, and to treat them with disdain simply because their exterior does not match our definition of success is an absolute failure of our humanity. Let us strive to build a world where dignity is valued far above dollars, where the strength of a person's character is prioritized over the prestige of their family name, and where respect is recognized as the ultimate currency of human connection. For in the final analysis of our earthly journey, the only empire that truly endures is the one we construct within the hearts of others, through our capacity to love, to understand, and to honor the sacred worth of every single human life.